Hey everyone, welcome back to FPL Fran. Today's video is going to be my Game Week 8 transfer plans, and we're looking at an international break here, so a time to sort of reset for 2 weeks with FPL, probably have a look at updates at a lot of the sort of data trends that we've seen so far, and my cheat sheet will definitely have a nice solid update too when it comes to sort of taking use of that data, looking at the fixtures ahead and things like that as well. And we'll do another What We've Learned series for this international break now that we actually have 7 game weeks of information, which is obviously a nice round number that we can sort of live with, I would say, compared to what was, I think, previously 3 or 4 game weeks of data, and that wasn't really much to go off of. What I can say so far from game week 7 is that I did make a move that I knew would be not something that would benefit me in the short term, right? A move like going out of Trent and going out of Bruno wasn't something that was going to necessarily deliver me instant value. A lot of it was Cole Palmer dependent and also Rico Lewis dependent, because I probably would have benched Rico Lewis this week, and I would have definitely played Bruno, for example. So definitely down on the hit. Trent got 8 points, Lewis got 4. So that's basically an 8-point gap. But then between Bruno and Palmer, if I rolled, that's 3 points in the direction of Palmer. So really it was effectively sort of a net -5 on top of that, which I think is fine, right? So ultimately losing 1 point compared to what was the non-hit rolling team, I'm okay with it because I've actually caught 2 Palmer price rises. And I actually like the structure a little bit more than what I previously had, given how strong Rico Lewis's minutes are and my confidence in, let's say, Guardiola and Gabriel's in the interim to definitely have strong, stable minutes that compete against, let's say the likes of Trent. Now, I did obviously sell the best defender of the game. That's fine. Trent did well, but I don't regret it too much. Finally got a small green arrow from 2 million to 1.9 million. Nothing crazy here. And part of that is because, without, let's say, captaining Saka this week, there weren't any sort of value gains to be had. And that's that. I think there was definitely a choice to go with the free risk captain, which was Saka. I still really liked the value play with Haaland here. And when I was looking at some of the market data, it was very, very close between Saka and Haaland. Ultimately, I decided to go with the safer play, and it hasn't really turned out well at all, right? There was a huge gulf between Saka and what he delivered and Haaland, and that's fine. And I'm sure some people also went for Palmer captaincy, which has also done well. So congratulations to all of you who've actually done that. This week, I'll also be looking at the sort of Fantasy Football Hub client as well to sort of plan my transfers. If you're interested in using the interface as well, looking for recommended transfers, please feel free to have a look at the link in bio below, where you can actually have a look at suggested AI transfers and things like that, even AI wildcards, if this is actually a wildcard week that you're looking at. And do let me know, of course, if you want a wildcard 8 video, as I'm sure it could be quite popular for you managers. Now, when it comes to game week 7, there wasn't too many crazy things that I really saw that I think are major trends for my team going forward. So I actually think that leaves me in a position where, despite me taking a hit and obviously taking a step backwards with my team when it comes to total points, I'm happy with what this team looks like over the next few weeks without having to make any transfers whatsoever, particularly with the Lewis minutes. And that's a good thing, right? Rodgers and someone like Dibbling getting really good minutes actually means that that's a good rotation piece for my 8th player. And actually, all the other picks are still having really good minutes. The only question mark I would say is probably over Dominic Calvert-Lewin. He still looks relatively terrible, or rather, Everton still look very terrible. Chris Wood, his sort of main competitor, has scored, albeit with obviously a pretty, I guess, or just one chance and one shot on target from Chris Wood. Dominic Calvert-Lewin himself actually had that one great chance and shot on target, and also a potential penalty, but I don't really think that was a penalty, so I'm not going to complain about it. 49 points for this game week is okay. And I think I still have the depth to rotate around some of the poor fixtures for my defense going forward. So I'm actually very happy with, what the team looks like for now. What's nice too, I think, is Saka looks so brilliant. Palmer looks so brilliant. Haaland and Salah a little bit debatable recently, I suppose. But for the most part, we have KDB coming back soon. 2 really good fixtures for Haaland coming up, which is Wolves and Southampton. I'd say Wolves and Southampton are probably close to, if we were to, let's say, tier teams right now, I think the Leicesters, the Southamptons, the Ipswich, and the Wolves could actually all be tiered within one bucket. And I think that's just how poor those specific teams have been so far. And it's nice that, of course, Haaland gets to play versus Wolves next, who just conceded 5 versus Brentford. And a lot of those chances were genuinely good chances for Brentford too. It wasn't like crazy finishing was on display. So Wolves have started the season, I think, conceding the most amount of goals. Their expected goals conceded tally might not be the absolute rock bottom right now, but I think after that Brentford game, they must be. And we'll definitely have a look at a sort of team trends video later down the line. So it's nice, of course, that we get to play versus them next. And the City defense, it was poor. But I also have to say that I think that was one of Fulham's better games this season. Arguably, the City tactical setup wasn't great. I don't think, for example, suddenly just having Rodri would have made it quite different, because a lot of the threat was coming from that transition of Adama Traore. And I feel like that is quite a unique circumstance, because there's not many tools that a lot of Premier League teams have that are very similar to Adama Traore. So there's that to think about. But of course, some of the chances, like for example, the Muniz chance and even the Andreas Pereira goal, you can argue, it is a symptom of bad defending, which maybe, of course, having Rodri is beneficial for. Am I worried about owning two City defenders? Not when their next two fixtures are Wolves and Southampton. After that, I can probably think about the idea of moving off of one of the City defenders. But we now also have a bit of an issue within the landscape of Robertson's minutes are a bit dicey within Liverpool. Arguably, I could go to another Arsenal defender, but I would only really consider an Arsenal defender later down the line. So when I look at Gabriel's fixtures, I do think that these are genuine red fixtures. Liverpool at home, Newcastle away, Chelsea away. I do really expect that Arsenal are going to lose their clean sheets in most of these matches, very much like in the start of the season when I was actually expecting a lot of Arsenal clean sheet blanks. But of course, when it comes to the fixtures around game week 12, that's when I can reconsider what I can do with my third Arsenal spot. Right now, I feel like I really want to keep Gabriel and Saka for the foreseeable, but I have the opportunity to probably assess what is going on with Calafiori's minutes, Timber's minutes, because right now with, let's say, White being out, it's nice that Calafiori and Timber can both play together, and you don't really need to call upon Kiwior. Now, with Timber being out in the previous game, he probably is going to recover over the international break. The question is going to be whether Calafiori actually continues to play over him if White comes back into the team. And I still don't have that sort of confidence level right now in Calafiori, particularly especially when there are bad fixtures. I can make that decision when I actually have better information, and I'd like to make that decision later down the line, which is fine. With players like Rodgers, him playing such good minutes, when we look at the Aston Villa fixtures, I think it's just a question of whether you're actually willing to play him in some of the poorer games. I'd even argue that Fulham away is a poorer game, so I'll show you prospectively what my team will look like in the future. At the same time, we have, let's say, Bournemouth in the distance, Spurs and Liverpool as well. What I can probably say is that Bournemouth and Crystal Palace at home, these are fixtures I would definitely play Rodgers in, but then there's a genuine question within my team about what I'm planning to do in game weeks 10 and 11. 10 is not exactly a great week for Rodgers, and that's the question mark of who do I move into at that sort of price point, because Semenyo's a little bit out of reach for myself since I only have 0.3 in the bank. There are a lot of other interesting mids right now, but even, for example, Brentford's run of games is going to be a little bit worse in a few weeks' time. So if I move to someone, let's say Fabio Carvalho, or let's say Sade, if they have good minutes, which we've seen a Carvalho benching, we've seen Sade benchings already, so I'd say their minutes are a bit dicey. It's a question of players like Mavididi, maybe even McNeil, as to how I plan to, let's say, move away from Rodgers if I choose to do so in a few weeks' time. It might be the case that I keep Rodgers. However, what's nice about Dibbling is that he does actually rotate really well with Rodgers. So I mentioned game weeks 10 and 11 being really tough for Rodgers. I can actually see myself playing Dibbling if his minutes continue to be really good. And I thought he looked exceptional in the Arsenal game as well. So the Rodgers Dibbling rotation is definitely something that I'm benefiting from. So as you can see, 10, 11, that's where I can play someone like Dibbling. And potentially my team could actually stay exactly where it is right now, which is what I really, really like. And that's pretty much all I have to say about my team in terms of my review. Let's quickly shift on to what my team would look like for next game week. So when I look at my team for next game week, what I have here is actually Flecken once again, reluctantly playing versus Man United away, but with how dire Man United look on offense, it's actually probably something that I'm actually looking forward to now, ironically. In defense, I am once again comfortable with Lewis, Guardiola, and Gabriel. It seems like Walker and Stones were actually called up for international duty. So I think that sort of argument that Lewis won't be able to come back if he's sort of playing too many minutes and needs a bit of rest doesn't really hold, because both Walker and Stones will be playing sort of the equivalent minutes. And probably Lewis might actually get, I guess, foreseeably less minutes within the English setup, because this is a good time to sort of, I guess, reintegrate Walker into the squad and see what happens with his minutes within the English national team. And then maybe Lewis's minutes, I guess, will still be there at that left back position, but we'll see whether he plays, 290s, that sort of thing. I do think that Lewis is more than likely going to start versus Wolves again. It'll be interesting to see whether I feel like I'm not sure whether Lewis will start, because actually I have the optionality of actually playing someone like maybe Leif Davis ahead of Lewis if I'm not comfortable that Lewis is going to start. But for now, I think we have a lot of comfort that he will start because he's playing really well. And you can argue that you're seeing all these sort of Walker, Akanji, Stone substitutions, and they're still not really impacting Lewis's minutes so much. At times, of course, he's playing right back, and that means that he still has to defend as a right back. But for now, the minutes still look really good. Do I really need to take the risk to play Davis over him? I'm not quite sure, particularly with Wolves looking as sort of pitiful as they have. they've obviously been finishing their chances, Wolves has, but even when you look at, let's say, the Brentford game, they only got really an XG of 1, which just shows that they were sort of overperforming. Whereas Brentford's XG, I believe, was something around 5 plus. So if I just, for example, have a look at, let's say, someone like Mbumo for that game, yeah, I mean, ultimately he had plenty of chances just by himself, 1.13 versus Wolves. And ultimately, there's a lot of opportunities for teams to target Wolves. And Lewis's offensive positioning is arguably not as, I guess, efficacious as Davis's, because Davis is someone who's on all sorts of set pieces. His open play threat is very consistent as a left fullback. But Lewis is someone who sort of operates within the midfield. So at times it's a question of whether he actually gets into the right exact position within the pockets of spaces that he does in the box, and whether he actually gets the ball falling onto him, and whether he can take a good sort of shot making opportunity. I still think he does. So that's why I'm pretty comfortable playing Lewis for now. And Davis is a really, really good first sub option, particularly also because there's a small threat with Gabriel. If you guys remember last season when Gabriel was playing versus Sheffield United at game week 10, I believe what happened was he played 2 games for Brazil on the international break, and Arteta mentioned that he was very, very tired and needed a rest. And this was exactly the type of game week where he actually got benched, because I suppose arguably it was an easier fixture. Now, that was a home game. That was also Sheffield United at home. I don't think Arteta is going to be that callous, I guess, versus Bournemouth away. That seems like a much tougher game. So I imagine Gabriel will play, but of course it's nice to just have a good auto sub, just in case if he's chosen to be sort of rested for that match. And that's that. As far as, let's say, the midfield, Palmer has a poor game, and I'm aware of that, but there's no reason to bench Palmer here. I think I'm also sort of looking at this as a situation like where I'm clearly betting against Liverpool defense for the foreseeable future. So I like the idea that I actually have Palmer now, where, of course, even some of these tougher games, I'm still betting against defenses that I don't actually own right now, which I think is something that I'm comfortable with. And then when I look at the fixtures, Newcastle at home and Man United away don't really look like tough games. Did I choose to buy Palmer on a particularly tough run of games? Yes, but at the same time, I'm not only choosing to keep Palmer up until game week 12. I've already wildcarded. So the idea of keeping Palmer is actually keeping Palmer for basically the entire run of games for the rest of the season, arguably, unless he's injured. So really, yes, of course, in the short term, I might suffer with, let's say, Liverpool and Arsenal as games. But after that, I'm very happy still owning Palmer within my team before a lot of future price rises come in. And I might actually struggle to get Palmer in the team later down the line, particularly if, let's say, I continue to own someone like Bruno, who could prospectively drop once again after his price unlocks itself. So that's something that I'm quite happy with. And part of it too is sort of predicated on Lewis getting really good minutes. If Lewis was someone who was, let's say, not getting so much minutes, then there could be a case to reconsider what I want to do. But also with Konate being at a really good price point, I could actually move to Konate in the future. So I'm not that worried about the team setup for now. And I think there's ways to go in terms of, let's say, how I approach Liverpool as well, where Jota actually looks like he's going to get really good minutes, as I said, for the rest of the season, just because of how poor Darwin has been, particularly at playing centre forward. So it might be the case where when Liverpool's fixtures actually get better within a few weeks' time, that I can actually consider that. But for game week 8 anyway, specifically, I will definitely play Dibbling over Rodgers, and I would play Davis over Rodgers as well. I think part of this is because Fulham have just been so impressive, and they're at home. So I always try to evaluate home and away as quite a significant feature within sort of my decision-making. Rodgers is going to be second bench. Dibbling, I thought looked incredible. His underlying stats so far have actually been pretty consistently good. If you see, for example, great chance versus Ipswich, but I think if you look at, let's say, the Arsenal game, he still created great shot-making opportunities versus a very tough team, right? Got into really good positions. And once again, a fixture like Southampton at home, you have to say, is much better value for a team like Southampton. So I think Dibbling is actually really good as a pick going forwards. I'm pretty happy with, let's say, going for Calvert-Lewin as well. And this is simply because Ipswich have looked really poor on defense, right? Giving away around 4+ XG to West Ham shows, I guess, the tail of the tape, because West Ham have been a team so far this season where we've considered them as a really poor team, and they were still able to easily dispatch Ipswich. Now, that was at home at West Ham, but this is an away fixture. Everton have been really poor on offense as well. Question, I suppose, is how much separation is there between, let's say, a team like Everton and Ipswich? I'm willing to sort of take the bet on Calvert-Lewin. And anyways, I've sort of made my bed, I think, with Calvert-Lewin as well. I don't really feel the need to sort of make a short-term transfer with him. So this is the team structure as it stands. Captaincy, I feel like, is also very firmly on Haaland. And that's simply because I think Bournemouth are still quite comfortably like a mid-table team. Yes, they lost to Leicester, which when you look at sort of the chances, I think Bournemouth still looked really decent in that game. And they conceded to, a good strike from, let's say, Buonanotte. It's not necessarily the case where I think that they're going to completely get torn apart by Arsenal, the same way that Arsenal were able to sort of do extremely well versus Leicester at home and Southampton at home. So Haaland is the captain once again, and this is the team structure for the foreseeable. So let's quickly look towards the hub client now to look at my future transfer plans after Game Week 8 if I roll the free transfer here instead. Right, so switching gears, we're actually moving towards the hub client here for Game Week 8. The plan is to look at my team for 8, 9, and 10, what my short-term plans could be, what my medium-term plans could be, especially if I don't roll or if I roll the free transfer. In Game Week 8, as I said, I don't really think that I have too many moves. What I can definitely consider is maybe dropping Calvert-Lewin for Wood. The AI suggestion seems to be Wood and Raul. These are the options that make the most sense to me. Wood is obviously a little bit more expensive, but I do have that money in the bank to actually go there. And that could actually be beneficial just from the point of view that, look, Wood is actually someone who is actually delivering. His team is still actually pretty poor when it comes to expected goals, right? So I think when we think about Nottingham Forest and how good they've been versus teams like Chelsea, versus teams like Liverpool, I think, yes, of course, they've been impressive in terms of keeping the scoreline low, but it's not like necessarily Nottingham Forest have been amazing when it comes to expected goals, right, as a team. So I don't think there's actually that much of a separation of value between Calvert-Lewin and Wood, but I would like to give personally Calvert-Lewin Ipswich away, just because Ipswich do look like a team to target. And then I'd move on to, in this game here, look, if I'm unhappy with Calvert-Lewin, then of course we just make the Wood transfer, and then we can kind of, go on with the rest of my life. As I said, we'll talk about Lewis and Game Week 9. I think I'm definitely playing Lewis there over either Gabriel or Dunk. But then in Game Week 10, we actually have 2 free transfers here in this situation, because I would have rolled on Game Week 8. I would have only used 1 free transfer in Game Week 9. And then here is a window where I think Game Week 10 is an opportunity to maybe consider what is the landscape with FPL Salah, right? Or sorry, what is the FPL landscape with Salah right now if we fast forward towards Game Week 10? Because one thing that I'm thinking about is when we look at the fixtures of Salah here, so 8 is Chelsea at home, 9 is Arsenal away. These are 2 bad games, so we skip these. And then Game Weeks 10, 11, 12 actually look pretty good. The Aston Villa game is a bit mediocre, I would say, but Southampton away, Brighton at home look pretty good. And that's a 3 fixture run where I can consider maybe whether my team wants a structural change, right? So I could consider that in Game Week 10, because when I compare it to, let's say, Haaland's fixtures, 8 and 9 are wonderful for Haaland, right? We've talked about how he's probably my captain for the next 2 game weeks in Wolves away and Southampton at home. But then the question is on Game Week 10, Bournemouth away, Brighton away, and Spurs at home, and then also Liverpool away. Are those 4 fixtures where I prefer to own a Haaland team or to own a Salah team? Because, of course, by owning a Salah team, I can also strengthen my forward position as well, potentially. And that's something to think about. I could also get rid of one of these sort of midfielders that I have that aren't playing or not sort of valuable in going forward. So that's something that I have been considering. Like, what if I do a move like maybe going out of Haaland and then either choosing to go out of Rodgers or Dibbling? Like, I could easily go out of Dibbling instead, just so that I can actually, keep Rodgers if I'm very confident that he's still going to be a value player within the game. I go for Salah here instead, and then actually with 7 million in the bank, I think one thing to ask ourselves the question of is, are we happy with anyone really who's cheap, I suppose, in the forward positions and doubling up on them? That does feel a little bit weird, but I still have the option of maybe, let's say, moving into someone like Mateus Cunha at that point in time, right? So Cunha actually from Game Week 10 has Crystal Palace at home, Southampton at home, then Fulham away, and then Bournemouth at home. So actually, he could be one of these sort of leading options that I would say, if I make 2 free transfers on this game week, to consider, because I would still already have Wood, and I would already have dropped, let's say, Dominic Calvert-Lewin around that time, and I could consider Cunha here, who I actually think is going to be on penalties for a team like Wolves. So if I go into Cunha here, what I do quite like is that this team seems really well-rounded. It has Rodgers for depth, and of course, if I sort of make the transfers on this week, I optimize the team. For the next few fixtures, I can see myself captaining Salah on 8, on 9, and maybe not on 10, because I could consider a Palmer captaincy versus Leicester away. I think it's actually quite close right now in my head. So that could be certainly an option to go for not 8, 9, and 10, but actually 10, 11, and 12 specifically. And then maybe reconsidering going back into Haaland after the Liverpool City match, which is going to be, let's say Game Week 14. On that week, I can reconsider moving back into Haaland as well. So that's something that I've been thinking about, how I can optimize my transfers over the next few game weeks. And I do think that a move potentially into Salah is on my sights. The only thing that makes me a bit cautious about making these sorts of moves on Game Week 10 is that early substitution for Salah within the previous match, right? If Salah is someone who's not playing 90 minutes per game, then the question should be asked as to whether I should move off of Haaland at all, because the gains between, let's say, the Haaland and Salah captaincies are a little bit marginal. It seems like even actually the hub client actually thinks that Haaland is a better captain, for example, when Haaland plays Tottenham at home. But I still think that Salah at Southampton away, that's just such a good fixture. I would not really say that 7.7 is good value for that Southampton match. I think there's going to be a lot more coming from there. So I do think that actually the captaincies are pretty close over 10, 11, 12, and 13. And so, and especially 13, when Liverpool play versus City, I'm probably going to captain someone else like either Saka or Palmer. And taking that into account, I do like the idea of making these moves, but it will be a little bit harder to go back into a different structure unless I have a lot of confidence in Rodgers just playing him foreseeably, through a run of games, maybe after game week 14. So that's something that I'm thinking about in my head, whether I actually really want to do this move. But I think this becomes actually a really strong team around game week 10. So that's as far as I've really thought. What's nice is Leif Davis actually still can rotate really well because the Ipswich fixtures in the interim are still quite good. You've got Everton, you've got Leicester, Man United at home, these sorts of fixtures, even Crystal Palace in the distance, that are actually quite good, generally speaking, for Ipswich. And then when it comes to Dunk, we talked about how he's a bit more of a long-term pick. So he doesn't have good fixtures in the short term, but then actually after game week 11, you've actually got fixtures like, let's say, Bournemouth away, Southampton at home, that you can definitely play him. And then Wolves at home, I do plan on playing him, either rotating him for maybe potentially a Davis, I would say, here on this game week, if I was to look back at game week 9, that sort of thing. So that is sort of what I'm thinking about with my team. Let me know what your thoughts are in terms of making that move towards Salah in game week 10. Is that something you're thinking about as a Haaland owner, or have you not thought that far yet? A little bit of just sort of a brainstorm ahead, since that this is an international break and we can just think about what to do with in the future, as I'm pretty happy with my team setup as it is now. Thank you guys so much for watching. I'll see you guys soon. Take care and goodbye.